Okay, gorgeous being, we cannot really talk about uh, money or health or bringing back your sparkle or relationships without talking about codependency. And I think that labels are for jars, but however, the label codependency can be helpful for this particular conversation, and then we can drop it again. So, codependency is really the definition that I prefer is anytime that we prioritize something or someone feelings, needs, or wants above our own. So anytime we're abandoning ourselves and getting outside of our own lane to get into the universe's lane or someone else's lane. So classically in codependency, it's called the drama triangle, and that's what you're looking at right now. The drama triangle of codependency. So there's three roles in the classic drama triangle, and they are the victim, the rescuer, and then formerly known or called the villain or the narcissist. And because we rotate through all three roles and we really play these roles depending on what relationship we're looking at in anywhere, it's important to maybe look at the role of the villain or narcissist a little bit more closely. So I find that when you're in victim mode for a long time, it's really frustrating. It feels hopeless. It feels frustrating and enraging. And then eventually, at times, we might flip from victim to get our power back in some way into behavior that could be labeled as narcissistic behavior, or then we become the villain in someone else's story. So and the same happens for if we're in rescue mode for a really long time and make ourselves responsible for the well-being of other people for too long that we're burning out and don't have any support, then we might also present with what could be labeled narcissistic behavior. And so I like to think of it as the burnt out or angry rescuer or the rage filled victim. But ultimately, we may end up in someone's story being the villain or being the narcissist. So these are the classic three roles. And of course, like everything is always a reflection of our subconscious habitual beliefs and unprocessed trauma. A lot of us actually grow up completely being born into patterns and programs of codependency because that's what our parents modeled for us. So we probably don't even know anything different. So for some of you, or maybe for you, this information is like, oh my goodness, my whole life I've just been living in these roles and accepted them as normal and accepted them as true. And the thing is, it's not just about relationship with other humans, it's also about relationships to things and habits and money and work. So it's how we relate to life, how we relate to each other, what kind of roles we're taking, a mindset that we're taking. So let's look closely at each of these roles and the mindset that's really underneath it. So a victim mindset is usually when we've forgotten how powerful we are. So I'm powerless. I have no control. Other people and forces control my life. Nothing ever works out for me. I'm not good enough. A lot of these roles go back to this big I'm not good enough belief. I am my traumas and my struggles. So feeling victim to the past, feeling victim to circumstances, feeling powerless, trying to control things that are out of our control, and really not taking control of what's going on inside. And that comes back to these beliefs and the programs and also a lot of unprocessed trauma. So a victim, the word victim infers that there's a villain. So we also believe when we're in victim mindset that there's someone whose fault it is, either God or the universe or our parents or our past or ourselves or other people, the ex, the boss. So the mindset is that we're powerless and that it's someone else's fault. Then the rescuer mindset, it really is about this whole idea that taking care of yourself is selfish. So a rescuer mindset believes that it's selfish to prioritize your own well-being, that your worth depends on how much you give or work and help other people, or that you're responsible for other people's happiness or their lives. And that there's also beliefs like, I can't rest, I have to do everything myself, I should always be doing something. So the underlying mindset of a rescuer is that unless you help other people, work hard, be a good person, always helpful, that you're not good enough. So again, notice the common theme of these roles. It's the not good enough, the not loving yourself enough to actually value your own well-being and value your own mental health and physical health. So that's why this definition of codependency is really like abandoning yourself to meet someone else's, to take care of someone else, or abandoning yourself in the sense that you're not remembering how powerful you are. Now, the burned out angry rescuer or rage-filled victim mindset is really kind of the mindset that everything sucks, that you don't even belong here, that you're so different that you can't connect, that nobody understands you, that it's not safe, and that you have to always be in defense. Also, the flip side of that is a little bit of arrogance. I know better than everyone else. I'm better than everyone else. So that's the flip side of the not enough that then leads into that compassion burnout. And then my needs will never be met. My life has no meaning. So those beliefs or mindset often causes us to get stuck in the role of the burnt out, angry rescuer or rage-filled victim. Really, the mindset is I'm all alone. Nobody's here to support me. I have to do it all myself. So that's kind of going on underneath. You might not be aware of these beliefs because, again, they're habituated belief patterns that we're just operating on. We're not consciously thinking that. So that's the tricky thing with subconscious stress and limiting beliefs. We might consciously not identify, no, I don't believe that, and that's not true. But it's the programs we're running on. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in the codependent roles. Now then, let's look at the tendencies. That's often a little bit easier for people to connect to. Our beliefs create our feelings and create our biology, and we feel our beliefs in our bodies. And then based on how we feel, we create certain behavioral patterns. And then that's what we can see with our conscious mind is the behavioral pattern. So it's a little bit easier sometimes to catch your codependency by observing your behavior. So let's see what the victim's behavior pattern might be. So a constant feeling of or swinging back and forth in the pendulum between overwhelmed and stuck, out of control, overwhelmed, stuck, out of control, overwhelmed, stuck on why, and often the analysis paralysis, as we like to call it. Why am I feeling this way? What's wrong with me? I need to figure out why I'm feeling this way to make it better. Always not really shifting into what can I do instead, but really being overly focused on the problem, being overly focused on what you don't want, being overly focused on why. The behavior is also, or the pattern is also conditioned to make others responsible for your suffering and well-being. So blaming others, it's because of this narcissist that I'm in this position, or it's because of my past, or it's because of myself. I am, in my own way, blaming, shaming, criticizing. And also on some unconscious level, waiting for someone else to rescue. So you might be attracted to people that are rescuers because you want to be saved. And ultimately, nobody really wants to be saved, but the program is telling us there's somebody out there that knows what's best for us and can fix, save, and rescue us from our suffering, from our pain. Not taking charge of what you can change. So that goes back to the overly focusing on what's wrong, overly talking about what you don't want and why you don't want it, and not really taking charge and making the simple changes necessary for you to feel better, for you to be back in your own lane. Outsourcing decision making. So that's a big one when we're in drama triangle of codependency, where we don't trust the choices we make. So indecision and looking to the internet, to other people, to doctors, to gurus, to practitioners, to therapists, to coaches to tell you how to live your life. And again, that's the pattern of wanting to be fixed, saved, or rescued instead of really trusting your own resource or doing the work that it takes to be connected to source and your own decisions. Not taking responsibility for your actions. So that's the big thing when we're in codependency and victim mindset. we don't really take responsibility for our own actions and our own feelings in our own lives. And that makes us feel very powerless. That can also lead us feeling very desperate and manipulative. So I know some of this is hard to hear, especially if you're recognizing like, holy shit, I've been in codependency. So I want to just pause here for a second and say, I was conditioned to be in codependency most of my life. And in my 20s, I became aware of this and thought I'm changing it by being aware of it, but I didn't actually change the subconscious programs. So the behavioral pattern kept creeping back in. And so just know that I'm speaking from personal experience and lots of trial and errors. And my judgment is that most people are codependently conditioned, and that this new paradigm that everyone is talking about is really the paradigm of shifting from codependency into interdependency, from the unhealthy way of relating to one another and life and the planet to aligned way. And that starts with personal empowerment. So please take this information with lots of compassion and deep breath, and understand this is meant to help you remember who you are and come out of these patterns. Recognize these are really just programs that are running and leading to certain behaviors. So seeing it black and white on paper or on the screen can be really helpful for us to understand, oh, hot dang, I can do something about it. And this is what it leads to. So that said, let's look at the role of the rescuer and how that may show up in your life. So as a rescuer, you're conditioned to fix, save, and rescue other people. So you might always be the nice guy or the nice girl. People pleasing is sort of the name for that. People pleasing, not having boundaries, feeling very uncomfortable with your own emotions and being vulnerable, and also being uncomfortable with other people's emotions. So that's why you want to fix, save, and rescue them. So because you're uncomfortable feeling your own feelings, you don't want other people to be upset either. So you just want to be helpful and help them and make them feel better. And even as I'm saying that, the little like old critical voice is like, yeah, but isn't that a good thing? Well, not really, because we're all ultimately responsible for our own feelings, and there's nobody can make you really feel better. We can hold space, we can listen, and that makes us feel better in the moment, but we can't really go into each other's heads and change the beliefs. We can't really go into each other's bodies and change the way we feel. That's still the person's responsibility. So the ultimate best thing we can do is help ourselves change and embody that energy and hold space from that place, but also have really, really healthy boundaries. Let's see. The flip side is also not trusting other people to handle their own lives. So there's that better than element also. When you're in the role of the rescuer, it often comes up as like, I know what's best for you, so let me tell you how you should live your life. You should go and see this therapist, or you should try this breath work, or you should read this book, versus just holding space for the person's emotion and helping them figure it out on their own. The rescuer often feels guilty when they're relaxing, because this conditioning of being in the role of the fixer, savior, rescuer is very much like where your self-worth is tied into how much you help others. So when you're not helping others and you're just relaxing, there's a deep undercurrent of guilt and shame that can often lead into self-destructive patterns like overeating or using drugs to numb, because that restlessness, that inner conflict often shows up when you're so conditioned to always help other people. And if you're trying to take care of yourself or doing a little self-care, that conflict of, no, you should be doing something. You should be doing something to help others, or at least be productive, clean the house, work, da, 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 da. It's always kind of there, that undercurrent. When we're in this role, we often feel unsupported. And that's when we kind of flip back into victim, like, nobody's there to help me. I'm always helping everybody. I'm always there for people. That creates this like unspoken expectation that people should, quote unquote, give you the same in return, but they often don't, So we teach people how to treat us. And when we're in the role of the rescuer for prolonged periods of time, we start to feel unsupported and like it's all up to us. And we're like, fine, let me just do it, So it might be difficult to ask for help. It might be difficult to receive help. And all of that, remember, always goes back to programs of unworthiness, not feeling good enough, and then all their little cousins. So when you don't feel good enough, you also don't feel good enough or worthy to receive. You don't feel good enough or worthy to receive abundance, love, support, help, vulnerability. So it all starts with beliefs and unprocessed trauma, and then it grows into this massive, seemingly complicated patterns. So hopefully looking at this helps you to see clearly whenever you're relating in one of these roles, you're relating in a way where you're abandoning yourself and not taking responsibility, not being in your own lane, not saying no, not speaking your truth, not being vulnerable. And so that's when we then get stuck and start to feel like crap. So let's go into the third role. When you're in the role of the burnt out, angry rescuer or rage filled victim, you might experience regular compassion burnout just from overfunctioning. When we're constantly in the role of the rescuer, another word for that besides people pleasing is also overfunctioning, where you're basically always hypervigilant trying to help everybody and their mother. So compassion burnout or burnout happens a lot. And a lot of times it's physical. So codependency often shows up as mental health stuff. For example, what's labeled anxiety or depression, but often physical as disease. That was the case for me. So for me, it showed up as underactive thyroid, as body aches, inflammation, all kinds of food allergies, all kinds of physical symptoms, depletion, basically, always being kind of burned out. That coupled with being very self-critical and impatient with yourself and others. So when you're in that role, you just kind of have no bandwidth. You're just pissed off, at the same time numb, at the same time just have no energy or bandwidth for anything. A lot of unexpressed emotions and needs that are just kind of bottled up inside, and expectations are not met and boundaries are super unclear. In that, when we're in that tendency, we're also conditioned to suppress anger until it all comes out at once. So you may have outbursts and then feel ashamed afterwards and go back into the role of the victim or the rescuer because you're like, oh my gosh, I just treated my loved ones horribly, or my partner or my kids. So now let me overfunction again to show myself that I'm a good person. When you're in burned out rescue or rage-filled victim, you also feel very lonely or misunderstood. And there's just kind of an overall dread and an overall sense of shutting down. So like I said, the way that we know this is by looking at this behavior and these patterns. And they're all very similar, So basically, whenever we're not prioritizing our needs, feelings, and wants, we're in one of these roles. And sometimes we argue. I have friends that are like, but not everything is codependency. I'm like, yes, and let's just look at this as the most common condition relational, the way that we relate to things. And like I said, it often shows up also how we feel. So whenever you're not feeling well, check in. Am I in one of these roles? And, you may have some healthy relationships where you're not at all relating in this way to people, where you trust them to take care of themselves, where you don't fix, save, or rescue or give advice, where you don't expect them to be anything other than themselves, and you just enjoy each other, and you take personal responsibility for your feelings, you're honest, you're vulnerable, you set boundaries, you honor your needs, you ask for help. You may have some relationships that are very much naturally healthy. Usually where codependency shows up is in our closer relationships with family, with friends we've had for a long time, or with clients or with work. So be aware that it doesn't have to be everywhere. It can just be with certain people or with certain situations. So we rotate through all three roles. And this can be hard to hear, So where are you the villain? Where are you so critical and kind of coming from this place of like, I'm better than them, so I'm so annoyed with them and they playing the victim all the time, then you're just on the flip side. It's still the same thing in green, just a different role. Or where are you playing the victim and are not expressing your feelings and your needs, not taking responsibility of what's yours to take responsibility for? Where are you always saving, fixing, rescuing? Where are you trying to help people feel better, but actually abandoning yourself in the process. So we rotate through all three roles. And I invite you, after watching this, to journal about your relationships and where you are in what role. And you might be surprised how even within one relationship, let's say with your mother or your father or your children or your partner or your friends, we rotate through all roles. And whenever we are in a codependent role, our body will immediately tell us. There's other languages that describe this pattern, for example, being in alignment or being in your power. There's more like the creative languages or the feminine languages that describe this. But ultimately, it all could be boiled down to this, and this is a very clinical way of looking at it. But ultimately, whenever you are out of alignment with source, your body will tell you you'll not feel good, either mentally, emotionally, or physically. Okay, so now to the fun part, the empowerment triangle for interdependency. So the idea is to shift these roles into the more empowered version. So the victim becomes the co-creator and remembers to start shifting towards what do I actually want instead and what can I do about it? So take back your power without needing to get enraged, right? So just taking back your power. The rescuer becomes the coach. So a coach teaches, a coach asks questions, a coach inspires, a coach leads by example, and a coach also has really, really good boundaries. And then the balance boss, and that's where everybody gets very excited. The balance boss is basically when we're completely in our power and when we lead from this new paradigm of self-love and self-worth. And that means we help people to reclaim their own lives versus trying to do the push-ups for them or shoving them into a direction that's not right for them, but basically trusting and guiding people to know what's best for them and empowering themselves along their journey. The subconscious mindset shift that's necessary to get into these roles, here's a couple of examples. So these are just examples. The best kind of subconscious mindset shifts are the ones that you create for yourself in your own language that are most meaningful for you. And this is where we apply the process of Psych-K. So I invite you to take some notes and create some balances from this of what feels relevant and emotionally meaningful for you. And as I mentioned before, at the kind of root cause of the codependent patterns is trauma. And then the beliefs that you're not enough, that you are, that your worth depends on how much you give or work, and that you're not lovable, maybe too different and don't belong. So look in the middle of the triangle to be able to have interdependent relationships and empowerment. We need to believe and feel that we're safe. We need to believe and feel that we're whole, perfect, divine perfection, or some other variation of this idea. We need to believe that we're good enough, that we do enough, that we have enough, that we can, and that we're capable. So basically, when people say, I want to believe in myself, these would be some statements that really help you to believe in yourself, to make yourself your number one priority, because everybody wins when you do so. So let's look at the co-creator first. Beliefs that help you shift from victim into co-creator would be, I'm in charge of my own life. I forgive myself and others for all the wrongs done to me, and I take responsibility for my own life. I can do this, whatever this might be. I am confident. It's easy for me to follow through, So as a victim, we often don't act. We stay stuck and overwhelmed. So it's easy for me to follow through. It's easy to me to prioritize my well-being. It's okay for me to make mistakes. That often resonates for people a lot because when you're in codependency, chances are you're also extremely perfectionistic and critical with yourself because of the lack of self-love. So when we're not loving ourselves, we're usually conditioned to be very, very critical. So it's okay for me to make mistakes. It's okay for me to feel all my feelings. Ultimately, when we're in codependency, we're also not feeling our feelings. We're feeling everyone else's feelings. We're making ourselves responsible for everyone else's feelings, and we're not really paying attention to our own feelings. I trust myself can be a really powerful belief to help eradicate this habit of always outsourcing your wisdom. Now, the flip side of the rescuer is the coach, and here's a couple of suggested belief statements. And again, making your own will help you to be most powerful and magnetic. I'm worthy of the best that love and life have to offer. It's easy for me to relax and let go. I'm at peace. I love and accept myself exactly as I am. It's okay for me to want more. I'm comfortable with my own emotions. I'm comfortable with other people's emotions, maybe even something along those lines. I trust others to handle their own lives. I trust my mother to take care of herself. It's easy for me to prioritize my well being. It's easy for me to be vulnerable. It's easy for me to be honest. It's okay for me to ask for support. I'm worthy and deserving of love. I'm worthy and deserving of abundance. It's safe for me to receive. Notice the direction that we're going. It's all about empowering yourself to have balanced relationships, because when you're in rescue mode, you're always there for others and not receiving. So you're over functioning, not receiving. In other languages, you're so in the masculine, not in the feminine, however you want to call that. So the balanced boss mindset would be, I'm loved and supported. I belong. It's easy for me to delegate and ask for help. I can maintain my individuality in my relationships. That's a big one, So when we're in codependency, we often lose ourselves. We start to do and think and feel what the other person does and thinks and feels. So we're kind of like, oh, my partner likes to ski, so I hate skiing, but because I love my partner, I'm going to just do it. And so that would be self-abandonment, really. And we think we are pleasing the partner, but actually we're completely losing ourselves in a life that isn't really our life. And our body will signal that to us by giving us feedback, whether that's mental health or emotionally or physical health, but in some way, shape, or form, it'll tell us like, ow, something hurts here because I'm saying yes to something that I don't actually like, that doesn't feel good to me. And maybe skiing is not a great example, but for example, if you prefer not drinking alcohol and your friends do, and because you want to be liked and because you want to fit in and because you don't want to upset anybody or make anybody uncomfortable, you drink alcohol, your body will give you feedback, not just from drinking, but also from not being true to yourself. So when you believe that you can maintain your individuality in your relationships, you can also show up just as you and know that the right relationships will love and appreciate you for you and don't need you to sacrifice what's actually important for you and what you like and what you want to fit in or to not make them uncomfortable. They'll be joyful for you. And if you believe that, then you can also attract those kinds of relationships. It's easy for me to communicate my feelings and needs. That's a really big one. So when you come out of codependency, you want to believe that it's easy for you to communicate. And you want to then start communicating, hey, I feel frustrated or I feel sad. And when I heard you say that, I made this mean that about myself, or I made up a story, and what I need is this, just being able to really communicate honestly and from an empowered place of what's going on, what you want and what you need. I respect myself. I value myself. So notice the common thread here is a lot of like self-love, abilities to set boundaries, abilities to stay in your own lane, feeling worthy, being able to receive, but also as much being able to take charge of what's yours to take charge of, and honesty. And that honesty piece is often very difficult for people because we don't have the beliefs to support radical honesty. We are conditioned and primed to believe that we would hurt other people's feelings and are so afraid of that. So when you're in codependency, there's a lot of anxiety. And anxiety is really hyper arousal of your nervous system, physical feedback. And it's actually a good thing because it's telling you that you're in a belief system that isn't true. And the thing that's going to help you feel better is shifting your beliefs and taking different actions. So imagine using the contrast of what you don't want to get clear about what you do want. So when we look at the co-creator here, imagine feeling grounded and taking inspired action consistently. Imagine owning your part in things and being compassionate with yourself along the lines and being compassionate with others. Imagine really trusting your own intuition and discernment to know what to do, when to ask for help, when to do it yourself, and just knowing how to live. Imagine really trusting yourself. So that's what it would look like once you step out of this dynamic, shift your beliefs, and shift your actions. Imagine as the empowered coach holding sacred space of listening and validating. Most people really don't need advice. They don't need fixing, rescuing, or saving, even if it looks that way. They just want to be heard. They just want to be heard and validated in their experience and trusted to figure it out. So imagine being able to say to your friends, to your family, to your coworkers, I hear you. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything I can do to support you? And then most people would be like, no, or sometimes they'd be like, yeah, do you have any feedback, any advice, but not necessarily assuming that that's what people want. Imagine being easily able to focus on your own projects, your own goals, and having healthy boundaries around your own time and energy. Imagine using your intuition and discernment to help others to empower themselves. Imagine that, just you, being totally in your own lane, how that inspires and empowers other people to do the same. The balanced boss is totally in touch with his or her feelings or their feelings, has a strong and compassionate style of leadership, has a lot of integrity. Again, that comes back to the honesty, does what they say they do, say what they mean. And if they, for example, need to change their mind, being honest about it, takes precious care of themselves. So, if let's say you've committed to something and you really don't have the bandwidth, instead of going to people please saying, hey, I am completely wiped, I'm going to choose to take care of myself tonight and stay in, please forgive me. Really going through whatever uncomfortable conversations necessary for the greater good of all involved, and always honoring yourself. That means setting healthy and compassionate boundaries, letting yourself change your mind, being honest about what you want, saying no for what you don't want, being able to communicate clearly, and then embodying what healthy empathy looks like. And healthy empathy means that we trust others to handle their own lives. We care for others by caring for ourselves. So this was a lot of information. So I invite you to journal about what you really want, where you identify yourself most with. And the reality is, if you think, yeah, I'm mostly rescuer, also take a look at the other two roles. Take a look at where you're disempowered. You may find some evidence that even within the relationships where you rescue a lot, that you also find yourself as the victim or the villain. Now, it's very exciting shifting into the new paradigm. It's very possible. And I find that without subconscious change, so without really shifting these programs and taking new action, it's very difficult. So familiarize yourself with the roles and especially get clear on what you want instead. Write about what you want instead, and write about it from a self-empowered place. Like, how can I show up differently so I can be that person to attract these kinds of relationships. Maybe you're waking up to the fact that all of your relationships are codependent. A couple of years ago, I did, and I was like, man, I have created this. So that means I can create something differently. So starting to make the changes necessary. It is a little bit like coming off of a drug. So there's withdrawal. There is times that are very uncomfortable. There are times that you might feel really lonely because out of the sudden, as you're leaving or changing the form of your relationships, there's a lot of space suddenly and no people because you're not on the phone anymore 24/7 with everyone and their mother rehashing what this person did and what that person did. So that is all normal and natural. So let's get into the work. So when I see you next in session or when you're coming to the group, bring this up, empower yourself by making the beliefs changes, and then also really get clear on the necessary behavior changes, the boundaries, the honesty, whatever is necessary for you to create the kind of dynamics that you want. And remember one last thing, we're not just codependent with people, we're also codependent with roles, money, our bodies, food, Everything is a relationship. So look at your relationships in general and how you relate to everything in your life. Check it for codependency. And foremost, be gentle with yourself. Always, always come from a place of love, from a place of being the compassionate, empowered observer, the CEO of your own life, so that you don't fall back into judging and criticizing, because that's just codependency coming in through the back door. Beautiful job listening. Take care of yourself.